Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel 2Be Like Christ. In today's video we're going to talk about knowing when you're sick. In Mark chapter 10 we read about a story. Jesus is going to Jerusalem to die, and he is leaving the city of Jericho, and there on the road is a blind man named Bartimaeus. And probably because of the crowds surrounding Jesus, somehow Bartimaeus finds out that Jesus is in the area. Could you imagine being blind during that time? It wouldn't be fun to be blind today, but especially during that time when probably the handicap situation was a little bit worse. People didn't care for them as well as they should have, and they lived a much harder life. Bartimaeus was probably sick of being blind, and so what does he do? He hears Jesus is coming by. He knows that Jesus has the ability to heal him, and he just starts yelling, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Can you imagine what desperation looks like? That would probably be the picture. Here you are, you're a blind man. You have one chance for the rest of your life to be able to see again, to live a normal life, to be able to get yourself off sitting on the street. And so he can't tell where Jesus is. He can't see him. He doesn't know probably which direction he's coming from. And so he's just yelling on the street. And I'm sure it wasn't too quiet because there's all this multitude around Jesus. So he's just screaming in desperate hope that Jesus will somehow come to him and nothing is going to stop him. There are actually people that are there on the road or somewhere around, and they say, "Stop, you're annoying. Stop yelling." And Bartimaeus just, no cares, zero cares. He just keeps yelling, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And eventually Jesus hears him and calls him over, and he asks him, "What do you want from me?" And he says that I could have my sight back. And Jesus gives it to him. You think Bartimaeus then worried about those people who he had annoyed? Said, maybe I shouldn't have done that because I annoyed those people? No. We have another story a few chapters earlier in Mark chapter 2. Jesus is in a house and the people find out that he's there and they just swarm the house. And you can't even get in the door, can't get anywhere near Jesus. And so there's this man and he has a paralyzing disease. His friends somehow get up on the roof, probably by pushing some people out of the way and, forcing their way onto the roof. And then they tear open the roof and they let this man down through the ceiling. So you can imagine this scene. There's all these people around this house, no room to walk, no room to stand. And you and like three of your buddies maybe have your paralyzed buddy on a bed that he's laying on, and you're trying to navigate through this crowd. It'd be hard enough as one person to navigate it, but you're like 4 people wide. And so no doubt they were like stepping on people or bumping people out of the way. And you know how people are, they're rude and they're like, you're not going to get in front of me. So no doubt they had a hard time. It wasn't just like they hopped up on the roof. Apparently everybody was enjoying this talk. It says Jesus was preaching the word. And when these guys come in, Jesus would have stopped and they probably would have been like, well, leave Jesus alone. Let him preach. Stop being annoying and distracting everything. Well, sorry to disturb the sermon, but we're coming through the ceiling. And Jesus looks at this man who they had let through the ceiling and he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And I don't know about you, but if I was the paralyzed man, I would have maybe looked at Jesus and said, "Thanks, but I didn't really come for that." This man obviously came so he could be healed of his physical disease. But Jesus actually deals with the bigger problem first, and that is his sinful disease. And then the Pharisees start murmuring. They say, "How can this man forgive sins? He doesn't have that right. This is blasphemy that he says that he can forgive sins." He looks at them and he says, which would be easier? For me to say I forgive your sins, or for me to tell this paralyzed man to get up and walk? Then he tells the man laying on the bed, he says, "Arise, take up your bed and walk." And that's exactly what the man does. So he gets what he asked for, or what he wanted from Jesus. You go on then to kind of the next paragraph in Mark chapter 2. And what we find is that Jesus has departed that place and he's gone and he's eating with some tax collectors and some sinners. And the Pharisees look in and they're like, "Why is Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus says to them, it's not those who are righteous who need a doctor. It's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's the sick who need a doctor. So I didn't come to save the righteous. I came to save the unrighteous. So what is Jesus teaching us here? Bartimaeus and many others, they came to Jesus and asked for healing for solely physical problems, and Jesus healed them. When the man with the palsy comes through the ceiling, Jesus kind of reveals what all of this is about when he addresses the bigger issue first, and that was the man's sin problem. But then he heals his physical issues. Here, Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. It doesn't appear that he's doing any physical healings, but he's communing with people who are unrighteous. And yet he still brings up this physician illustration, and he says that I'm here to help those who are sick. You see what Jesus is doing here. The reason that Jesus did so many healings was because it was a parable of types of what he was actually there to do, and that was to solve the sickness that contaminated the entire world. It was the sin sickness problem. Now you look at the examples of Bartimaeus and the man who came through the roof who was paralyzed. These people, they knew they were sick. They lived it every day. Blind Bartimaeus probably sat in that same spot all day because he couldn't go anywhere, or else he'd get run over by a camel or something. The paralytic man laid on that bed all day. You bet he wanted up, and he knew he was sick, and he said, I am going to do whatever it takes to get to Jesus because he's the only one who can heal me. They knew they were sick. They knew they needed the doctor, so they went at any cost. The tax collectors and the sinners understood what Jesus was doing in these healings. They understood what had just happened in that house where the paralytic man was first told that his sins were forgiven and then that his physical ailments were forgiven. And they were there for that first type of forgiveness that Jesus was offering. They understood that they were sick, that they were sinners, that they weren't perfect, and they needed Jesus' healing and for him to be their physician. The Pharisees, on the other hand, could not understand what Jesus was communicating through those signs. They look into that room and they say, these are unrighteous people. We're righteous people. And Jesus over and over again tells them, that's your problem. You don't realize you're sick. You don't realize that you are actually in this unrighteous category because no one has ever been justified without my blood. If only you would have the faith of the paralytic, blind Bartimaeus, the sinners and the tax collectors. If only you could see how sick you are, then you would come to me. And that's the problem with so much of the world. You know, we look around our lives, and because we don't suffer from anything immediate, because the consequences of sin are sometimes very far off, we look at ourselves and we think, there's nothing wrong. I don't need healing from anything. And Jesus is offering, and Jesus is giving us these examples in the scriptures to help show us who we really are. There is no one who does not suffer from a sin sickness. There is no one who walks into that room in Palestine and says, I'm righteous. These people aren't. Everyone's unrighteous. Be wise enough to perceive what Jesus is communicating through his signs. There's a physical sickness. I can heal that. A bigger problem, sin sickness. I can heal that for everybody. You just have to realize you're sick and you have to come to the physician. So this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. Understand Bartimaeus and understand the paralytic man, that when they understood that they were sick, there was nothing that was going to keep them from getting to the only place that they could be healed. Bartimaeus did not care one bit if he annoyed those people with his yelling. The paralytic man did not care one bit if he stepped on some people and you know, had to bump some people out of the way and they got a little bit of offended, and he didn't even care when he destroyed somebody's house. He had to get to Jesus because there was nothing, and there is nothing in our lives that should keep us to coming, I can't speak, that should keep us from coming to Christ. Nothing. Don't let anything stand in your way. Come, be healed. Hi everybody, and thanks for watching the video. I appreciate all of the comments that I've received verbally and on YouTube and in support of what I've been doing, and I appreciate any critiques that I've received as well. Make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe and comment and like the video. All of that helps the videos to rank, and so more and more people can see them. And remember to share the videos if there's anyone in your life who could use this information, or if you've benefited from it, and that way more people can see them as well. Thanks again.